Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are on our beautiful planet. Welcome, everybody. I am going to read out our guidelines so that together we are singing from the one hymn sheet, as they say, just for this 90 minutes. And so welcome to this ASI gathering. Thank you for coming and for creating the time to support, I suppose, a movement towards more accountability and ethics and heart in our spiritual practice, and in our spiritual work, and in our spiritual communities. These webinars are here to support our members and friends and the mission of spiritual integrity. We ask you all to stay connected, accountable, sensitive, and skillful when engaging today. We ask that you agree to create and maintain safe space for learning and growth. To that end, we will all refrain from marketing and self-aggrandizing while avoiding inflammatory or deliberately destructive comments. If you want to recommend a relevant and appropriate resource to attendees, please do so in the chat box. And the ASI will remove participants who engage in harmful activity after one warning. And thank you so much for creating this community with us, and for showing up with presence, attunement, and self-awareness. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Scott and our tech wizard, Cindy, who's supporting him today. Scott Brown. First of all, Scott's a farmer, and that's what I love about Scott the most, is his connection to the land. And there's something about that rootedness in Mother Earth that gives him a very rounded approach in all of his work. He's a mediator and a restorative justice practitioner, a workshop leader, a life and relationship coach, a transpersonal psychologist, and an author. He has worked as a restorative justice program coordinator, a wilderness rites of passage guide, and as a mentor to youth, both in and out of the criminal justice system. He's a leading advocate for bringing the principles and practices of restorative justice to bear on the full range of social issues. And he's the author of Active Peace, a Mindful Path to a Nonviolent World. He holds a master's degree from Naropa in transpersonal psychology and eco-psychology, and has a comprehensive training in nonviolent communication and body-centered psychotherapy. And so I consider it a privilege to be working with somebody like Scott, where he can not only tell us how to manage situations that are difficult in our lives currently, but also as a preventative measure so that we lay the path for better spiritual communities and spiritual holding for those who follow us and come after us. Over to you, Scott.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you for the introduction. Thanks for having me. And thank you all for being here. If you are so inclined, please say hello in the chat. Tell us where you're from. Let's keep building this beautiful community. And also, if you have some training, experience in, some relationship with restorative justice that you'd like to share, please feel free to post that in the chat. I'd be curious to know. I'm checking in from a small town on the western slope of Colorado. And I want to thank Cindy again for her support. She's going to be supporting me with primarily with the chat and the breakout group that we'll do. And my relationship seems to be my path in life, learning how to do them, starting from a pretty handicapped place. And maybe I'm not alone in that, but my work with Active Peace really started the day I was sitting on a marriage counselor's couch next to my now ex-wife, realizing that I was almost completely out of touch with my feelings, let alone hers. So that was a big epiphany that led me from Nova Scotia, Canada, where I was living, to Boulder, Colorado, where I did a lot of those trainings that Jack mentioned. And I trained with two different restorative justice programs on the Front Range, and I had amazing mentors. And I did eventually go on to run a program for the Boulder County Sheriff's Office for a while. And my training in restorative justice was over 15 years ago. But those principles and practices are still working me precisely because of how relational they are. So it was a perfect fit with my trajectory of wanting to learn how to do relationships and go deeper into that work. So that's our territory for the session, is relationship and how to nurture safety and accountability and repair when there's been harm. And we're going to look at tried and true ways to do that using the principles and practices of restorative justice. And before we can get to accountability and repair, we have to get people in the room together. And my understanding is, in the ASI context, that has not been easy, to get people who've been harmed together with people who are primarily responsible for the harm together. And I believe that these principles and practices, this session today is a starting point, can really help in that regard. So with that as an introduction, I'm going to go to some slides. It opens with a photo I took at the Martin Luther King Jr. National Historic Site as a nod to Martin Luther King Jr. and my belief that this work of restorative justice is a beautiful way to continue to evolve nonviolence. This is our agenda. We'll have an introduction to restorative justice foundations. That's kind of what the whole thing is about, but we'll start with a little piece of that. There will be a breakout group. We will go back to looking at some additional foundations. We're going to look specifically at framing harm as unmet universal human needs, which I do in this work. We'll have a group discussion and then look briefly at requirements, challenges, additional resources, and possible next steps. I have not built a break-in, so please take care of yourselves that way. And please put your questions in the chat. There will be some time for questions, and we will prioritize those questions that are in the chat. And if you don't get your questions answered today, we'll also include my email address at the end of the presentation. Feel free to follow up with me. This is a big topic, and my intention here is really to give you a foundation that you can build on. This can really only be an introduction given our short time and the big topic, but hopefully there's lots of potential for follow-up, that it will whet your appetites for more. And I'm not going to say much about the history of contemporary restorative justice in the justice system, except to say that the roots are indigenous. Before prisons, court systems, as we know them, Native peoples had their ways of repairing harm. And my understanding is that those methods were very holistic, they were very spiritual, they recognized that they weren't dealing with bad people, but people who were out of balance, out of harmony with spirit. And I really celebrate the way that this work of restorative justice can realign us with that legacy. So we're going to look at the basic foundations of restorative justice as I learned them and as I practice them now outside of the justice system, with work that I call active peace circles, which unfolds at the community level, at the group level, and is relevant in all kinds of contexts. And I fully expect that there will be more questions than answers at the end of this. So again, just to say, I'm happy to go deeper with any or all of you, at a later date. So here we go. And we're going to start with the 5 R's of restorative justice: relationship, responsibility, respect, repair, and reintegration. These really lay a foundation for the work. And I'm going to go through them one at a time, pretty fast. You will have time to reflect on them in small groups in the breakout group that we'll do after this, this quick presentation that I will do on the 5 R's. So starting with relationship, there are questions that flow from each of these 5 R's, such as, how have interpersonal, economic, and social relationships been damaged? Why are these relationships important? Are interpersonal relationships being prioritized? And this is really what this R of relationship boils down to, is prioritizing relationship. Who needs to be involved as support for those harmed and those responsible for the harm, so that everyone can participate fully? And I will talk more later about what that support specifically looks like. The next R is responsibility. What happened? What is the harm? Who is responsible? This is where we can really go deeply into what happened, why it happened, what the context is, who's responsible, what contributed at the systems level. And I'll talk more about how we do that, what that means in this context a little bit later. How do the people responsible for the harm feel about their actions now? So very organic questions kind of flowing from these R's. What is needed to encourage more responsibility? Respect, the third R. Is respect being shown to all involved? Are those involved showing self-respect? What is limiting respect? What support is needed to encourage more respect? Fourth R is repair, and I invite you to consider how these R's kind of build on each other. So starting with relationship, if we can start with people prioritizing relationships, then there's an opening. If there can be some initial responsibility taking, there's an additional opening. If there's respect involved, authentic respect, then we actually have set the stage, can set the stage where people can come together to really consider what repair looks like in this situation. So some of the questions flowing there: has anything already been done to repair the harm? What are the ripple effects of the harm, and how can they be addressed? We want to look deeply at the ripple effects. What systems level changes need to be made? So this is where we can look at organizational culture and structure and how it might have contributed. What other specific actions can be taken to repair the harm? And in the end, do those harmed feel fully restored? And the way we do repair in a restorative justice circle process is everyone participates. I learned to start it with a brainstorm where we go around the circle and people just contribute one idea. So it's very participatory. Even the person or the people primarily responsible for the harm contribute to the repair. The final R is reintegration. Once the process of repair is completed, if we've gotten that far, are those harmed able to reintegrate back into the community in a good way? Are they willing to allow those responsible for the harm to reintegrate back into the community without lingering blame and resentment? Are those with responsibility for harm willing and able to reintegrate back into the community without feeling shame and resentment? To the extent that the answer to any of these questions is no, the harm has not been fully repaired. So what more needs to happen to get to yes? So this final R sets our bar very high, right? In terms of what actually constitutes repair. So that's a quick run through of the 5, just a couple more things to say about them. Just the way that they give shape to the restorative mindset. And that's a very important concept in this work, is having a restorative mindset, upholding a restorative mindset, fostering it up front. And then the questions flowing from the 5 R's really do form kind of an outline for the process. The restorative mindset fosters an atmosphere of safety, respect, and accountability, supports shared understanding of what happened and what the harm is, encourages collaboration in repairing the harm to the fullest extent possible, and enables people to show up fully for the process. So I feel like this slide really encapsulates a lot about restorative justice, right? The emphasis on safety, respect, accountability, shared understanding goes so far in repairing harm. Just having some shared understanding of what happened. It doesn't mean people will have, understood it exactly the same, right? But if we can just get shared understanding of what happened, that contributes a lot. And it's very collaborative in the way it goes about repairing the harm. And if it feels like punishment, it's not restorative. So this is the beauty of having the person or the people primarily responsible for the harm participating fully, contributing to what repair looks like, right? They've participated in that, and there's going to be a consensus on that at the end that they will buy into. So, yeah, if it feels like punishment, it's the old paradigm, right? It's punitive. So I think next we've got a little time for questions. Cindy, I will go to you. There is a little bit of time for a couple of questions. Do we have a couple that have shown up in the chat?
Yeah, so someone wanted to know if the slides will be available.
They'll be in the recording for sure. I have them in a Keynote form, which is what my Mac uses, and I've never shared them, but I could probably share them if somebody wanted more than just the recording.
Okay.
I see Rick Archer has a hand raised. Rick?
Yes, I'm just trying to put this in the context of the ASI. It comes immediately to mind, things like justice for people who have been discriminated against racially, or because of their gender or things like that. But I'm trying to fit it into the ASI context, and I guess what comes to mind is people who feel they've been abused by spiritual leaders in some way, sexually, financially, things like that. Is that what we're thinking here, or can you give me, or maybe Jack can give me some other angles on how this is relevant? It's important, but I'm wondering how it fits into our purview.
Yeah, well, I think we'll fill out that picture a little more with the additional the rest of kind of my presentation and the slides that will come a little later. One of my conclusions, just based on what I am going to end up presenting to you today, is that this work can hold power imbalances, for one thing, and that it is relevant in all kinds of contexts. So I hope to fill that out a little bit, Rick, as we go. Just reflecting on how these 5 R's alone and the restorative mindset, if that's really in play, if that's really being fostered, how that might support ASI in its context. I think all of these pieces are relevant personally. And, I think there's a lot of potential follow-up that we can do post, this hour and a half.
Scott, can I add in a little bit there too?
Sure.
When we look at where spiritual practice is, spiritual leadership is right now, globally, as a sweeping statement, and if we look at where we'd like to go, the difference from what I can find is how we relate to each other. The pathway in between is changing the relationship, the power differential between teacher and student, and all the dynamics that happen therein, our often inability to receive feedback properly, to support ourselves and our own human needs as leaders. All of this is about how we relate to ourselves and to others. And in changing our relationship with ourselves and having more self-awareness of our little self, responding to these needs, from there, the relationship of how we connect with every person, it matures. And I think through changing of relationship, that true transformation of spiritual leadership can change.
Yeah, thank you.
Just wanted to make it more relevant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm seeing a hand raised and some other questions in the chat. I think I'm gonna have to push us on just to keep us on time. And if those questions are still relevant at the end, please bring them again. I hope there will be time. Cindy, I will ask you to go ahead and post, if you haven't already, the 5 R's in the chat and the instructions for the breakout group. And I will read those. Yeah, thank you for posting that. So you're going to have 25 minutes to be in groups of 3 is what we're going to be aiming for, to really reflect on those 5 R's, the restorative mindset, the energy of that, and how that might be helpful. So start by introducing yourselves, say hi, and then please select a timekeeper, facilitator, to keep the group on track. Track the overall 25 minutes, make sure both rounds are done. There's 2 rounds, and make sure that everyone gets heard in that. And we've got the 5 R's posted there again, right in the chat. So round 1
Will we still be able to see the chat once we break into the breakout group? Okay.
Yes. So take a minute to reflect on the 5 R's in a personal way. And then share. You'll have 3 minutes each to share what supports and what limits your ability to really live the R's and a restorative mindset in a consistent way. And then round 2, take a minute to share, to bring to mind a conflict that you are involved in. Doesn't have to be a huge thing. And then take 3 minutes each to share and reflect on how the conflict could be or have been altered if there were more conscious emphasis on any or all of the 5 R's. So we have a little bit of time to debrief that. Feel free to post in the chat or raise a hand if there's some comment really related to that breakout group and the 5 R's, the restorative mindset. Any questions about?
So you might want to repeat that, Scott, because there were still people coming back
Okay.
in.
Thank you. Yeah, I see. So we have some time now for a really short debrief of that time together. If there's any comments related to that exercise. And yeah, I think it's pretty straightforward. Keith, I see a hand. Please, you're muted.
Yeah, it's really interesting exercise. Fantastic. What came up for me was a reluctance to engage because I had a pre-concept of where the other party was and how they would engage. So the relationship and certainly the responsibility maybe wasn't in an ideal place, and therefore may scupper even the start. Maybe how do you start this?
Yeah.
And I suppose really it's giving somebody a chance, saying, okay, let's just see.
Yeah. Well, that's $1 million question right there. And that's always going to be the case, isn't it? Right? That people are already, we judge. So there's preparation that goes into this that I will talk about a little later, how something like this actually gets started. But this is why this focus on those really basic 5 R's is so key, just in supporting people to let go of their judgments, to prioritize relationship, to see that that's what it's going to take to repair the harm, to often to heal the community. So, but it's deep work, as you have identified, very personal, often. So I think maybe there's time for one more question. Sophia.
Hi, yes. Well, you've answered really, because I'm very, this is totally unlike I expected. I'm very grateful, Scott, because what came up for me was something deeply personal, and I hadn't even realized it, that was present in my community. I'm not going to talk about it, but, and then each of our shares, where there was so clearly missing this kind of mindset, the restorative mindset that you've talked about. So, and so mine was a very personal family situation, but I really recognize, I'm in Cardiff in Wales, and I've just recently come back after 35 years of being away, and they flagged up, I happened chance to read that UNICEF have made Cardiff the best city in the whole of Europe for UNICEF, for taking care of children. And I would love to take something like this in as my entry point, and saying, I just met this group of amazing people and Scott, who have this as basic principles. Where can you point me in a direction where this is being done, or where this would be useful?
Yeah.
So it's on a personal family level, it's on a community level, it's in best business practice or not best business. You know, everything that I'm seeing, and I came with no expectations whatsoever to this presentation. So it's remarkable so far. I'll let you get on with
Great.
it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, let's appreciate just how that restorative mindset goes against the grain, you know, and just how radical really that is. Yeah, time for one more question. Don Kimball, I saw you had a hand up. Do you still want to put something in?
Yes, thank you. This might relate to what they were talking about, but the community part seems really important to me. Like, I imagine when the indigenous people used these processes, they lived in communities of, say, less than 150 people or something. And so I wonder now, how do we, like, I think even when people learn these principles, they don't know where the community is, where we can process these things together. You know, how do you create that? And, or are there some of those communities available?
Well, I'm thinking of the ASI context and individual spiritual communities where harm happens, and a process like this can be considered.
Mm.
And yeah, I think that's a big part of our task too, is to strengthen our communities, to find them in some, you know, for some people. So thank you. The questions always deepen it and fill it out. And I wish we had an extra. I was telling Jack at the beginning, this would be a great 2-hour presentation with just more time for your questions. So apologies for rushing through, but I am really wanting to give you foundations that you can build on and that we can follow up on. So I'm going to go back to sharing screen to help fill out the picture of just some restorative justice basics. Again, please put your questions in the chat and we'll prioritize those and get to as many as we can. I saw the question on trauma, question on organizational example. I'll touch on those as time permits a little bit later. So other things very basic to restorative justice is this emphasis on safety, support, and strong facilitation. And I want to say something about what support looks like in this context. Support looks like the person, let's just say it's one person in our example, who's been harmed. That person has a support person sitting right next to them in the circle, whose job it is to simply to support the person who's been harmed, to add in to the circle things that haven't been said, and to participate fully in how to repair the harm. So that's support. The same is true for, let's just say it's one person primarily responsible for the harm. That person also has someone sitting right next to them in the circle whose job it is solely to support them and to contribute from that place. So that's what support looks like in restorative justice. And that's almost always going to be the case, that there are support people as needed in our circle process. The use of surrogates is possible, and this feels very relevant in an ASI context, right? Mostly when we think of surrogates in restorative justice, it's a person who's been harmed, who for whatever reason does not want to participate, cannot participate, is not comfortable participating. So we can consider having someone else in that role of person harmed. We can also, in this process, which the active peace circle process, which is really the work that I do now outside of the justice system, which is more spacious than anything that happens in the justice system or can be, we can consider a surrogate for, let's just say it's one person primarily responsible for the harm who doesn't want to participate. We can have that seat empty and still have a very full process. If we have people who've been harmed, if we have the community represented with all of the ripple effects out into the community, we can have a full process where we really unpack the full extent of the harm, what repair might look like, how we can keep that harm from happening again. We can do all that without the person primarily responsible for the harm. I've done it. It works. We could also consider having someone in that role as a surrogate. And we might be very surprised at the insights, the wisdom that could come out of having someone who's, bringing the appropriate level of preparation and mindfulness into that process to role play it in a very realistic, very facilitated way. So I think this is a topic we could probably talk a lot about in an ASI context, which we'll have to park for the next time we get together. The community perspective, community voice, very important in restorative justice. What that looks like is there's at least one person, often a couple, in a restorative justice circle who are representing the community. That's their role. They're bringing that bigger perspective to the ripple effects out into the community. And I think this is also really key in an ASI context, because when we've empowered the community in that way, when we're willing and able to talk about the ripple effects into the community, I think that can provide a lot of incentive for a process to happen, a deep healing process like we're talking about here. I think that could, if I were a spiritual teacher who had abused my power and this was being presented to me, that would matter to me. If the community was going to be represented and there were people talking about the impacts to the community, this process as a way to repair that harm to the community. So those are a few things I wanted to add in just briefly, and there's probably a lot more to talk about as potential follow-up. Additionally, with the active peace circle approach that happens at the community level, we can bring out a very full range of ripple effects, because we can have the spaciousness to go deeper than is generally true in a justice system context. We can really look deeply at root causes, organizational and community contexts. We can have a broader framing of responsibility and contributing factors. What contributed at the organizational level? And this is obviously not a step-by-step guide in how to organize and run a restorative justice circle, but I wanted to give a little bit of insight into how a process like this starts. And I want to say that preparation is key, and preface that by saying that this work doesn't pretend. It doesn't pretend to be restorative if it's not. If people aren't showing up with a restorative mindset, they don't participate. If the process isn't moving in a restorative direction, we pause it and see if we can get it back on track. And if we can't, we end it. Because what happens otherwise? We're very likely to cause more harm, and we undermine the credibility of the process. So preparation is key, and what that looks like is initial enrollment conversations, starting with the question, well, who needs to be in the process? Who needs to be in the circle? And this will be the community answering that question. You know, who's going to facilitate it, right? The community will initiate this process. And then if we, decide to go forward, facilitators are chosen. It's those facilitators who are best positioned to talk with people about what the circle process is, because they're the ones that are really going to know it. So with an invitational energy, because this is voluntary, they would provide potential participants with basic information, that there will be preparation, that it is a circle process, that there will be support people and community representatives involved. They would describe the expectations, something about the restorative, just general about the restorative mindset, that it happens with ground, very specific ground rules. And they would listen for some initial responsibility taking. It doesn't have to be full responsibility at this point, because no one can take full responsibility for harm until they know the full extent of the harm. And they won't unless there is a process like this. But as a facilitator, I want to hear that there's an opening. I want to hear some initial responsibility taking so that I have a sense that, yeah, this person is a candidate. This person might be able to show up with a truly restorative mindset. So that's the initial step. If we get to the next step, that looks like individual preparation meetings before bringing people together. We're going to outline the process in detail, including the agreements and the ground rules. And I'll provide a link to those, the write-up that I have on those at the end of the session. We're going to cultivate that restorative mindset in all participants. We're going to give them an opportunity to be heard and seen, to vent, to get empathy, and get support in reframing non-restorative ways of thinking and speaking. And this preparation work can be customized to the needs of the people and the situation. And it's when the facilitators decide that people are ready that a process can begin, a circle process, the process of where people come together. And that too unfolds, it unfolds very organically, and we're not going into the details of that today. But those 5 R's help us unfold the questions around what happened, what are the ripple effects. I do want to say that this work can happen very readily on Zoom. That's the only way I've really done it. And it can work really well that way. So we have a little bit of, no, I guess we don't. I'm not gonna take questions at this point. Maybe we'll have some time at the end, but it looks like we really need to keep going. So I'm gonna say a little bit about the way this work frames harm as unmet universal human needs. This was one of the things I really wanted to bring to the group, to the ASI context, that I think can be very helpful. I've seen it be helpful in working with spiritual organizations. We can call those needs values, we can call them longings. And many of you are probably familiar with nonviolent communication, where needs are understood to be universal. All human behavior revolves around the meeting of needs. Needs make no reference to a specific person, action, or thing. Needs don't point fingers. Our needs connect us with what we value in life. Our feelings tell us whether or not our needs are being met. To express our needs is to offer the gift of connection to life and each other. And Marshall Rosenberg has said that violence, criticism, judgment, and expressions of anger are all tragic expressions of unmet needs. And so harm in the context of restorative justice is always going to track back to unmet universal human needs. And when we can do that, we can really humanize the harm, humanize the situation, and that just has all kinds of values. Cindy's going to post the link to the needs inventory in the chat. This is from the Center for Nonviolent Communication. Hopefully you can open that link and toggle between that and being in the meeting here and the chat, because we're going to open it up to discussion, starting with a couple of specific questions that are related to this framing of harm as unmet needs. So Cindy, if you'll post those questions in the chat, and we'll open it up, and we have we have a few minutes. So don't be shy. If you've got a comment, let's start with the first two questions that are posted in the chat. Feel free to post in the chat a question or raise a hand. Really want to start with this question around value. What value do you see in framing harm as unmet needs? Or if you prefer, what are some possible drawbacks?
I remember being at a science and non-duality conference that used to happen in Northern California, pre-pandemic times. And I remember speaking to a spiritual teacher saying, well, what do you do for fun? Like, what are your hobbies? What do you do to resource yourself when you're not teaching? And he said, the teachings resolve everything. I just teach and have my family, and the teaching meets all my needs. And I went, really? And I just sat with it and I thought, that's really curious. Oh. And subsequently, of course, harm happened with that teacher who's I suppose evolved out of drinking the Kool-Aid, that the stillness within resolves everything on a human level. Sorry, it doesn't. It doesn't. I still have to eat. I still need friends. I still need to get physically active every day, and somehow some teachings have omitted the importance of taking care of our human needs. And I think it's given rise to a lot of misuse and sometimes abuse of power,
Thank you. Thank you for saying that, Jack. I had it in my notes and then I saw the time and I thought, I'll just skip that. Maybe it's not an issue for this group, but yes, there can be in spiritual contexts this belief that, oh, I don't have needs. We don't have needs. And I've never seen that be helpful in the context of real harm. So thank you. DK, I see you have your hand up.
Hi. Well, I'm thinking of my own experiences. I was raised Catholic in Canada, and the priest in our community hurt boys and created a camp. and groomed boys and then abused them. And then I was part of a Buddhist community in Edmonton, and the leader of the Shambhala lineage was hurting women. And so I think for me, a big need in spiritual community is safety. And I'm assuming in restorative justice, that's important as well.
Very important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was hoping to bring that out today. I hope that's already in the field, that there is that emphasis on that. So yeah, there's a lot to reflect on in that needs inventory from the Center for Nonviolent Communication. I see Rebecca's question about, what is the unmet need if you are frustrated with the suffering of others you see have been harmed and have not received justice. So yeah, reflecting on that is potent. The need for ease, justice itself might be a need at some level, right? Peace, justice, life-serving energy in the world. There's just all kinds of ways these questions can live in our hearts. Framing harm as unmet needs makes it more of a universal. Here we can meet. Yes. Yeah. So that's the energy of this. I've seen it be very humanizing. I've seen it be a real epiphany for people in spiritual communities, because that's mostly who I've worked this process with. That's their biggest takeaway is, it was the framing harm as unmet needs that is my biggest takeaway from this process. So Cindy, if you'll post our responses, Cindy's posting some of our responses to question number 3, which I'm thinking we've got to move on. But question number 3 was really related to, it was, how might a restorative mindset and approach, such as what's been outlined here, be helpful to you or an organization such as ASI? So beyond that part about framing harm as unmet needs, how might it be helpful in general? And so we just wanted to have this in the chat. There was a question earlier about how being trauma-informed plays in, and I do want to say that I believe that this work, because it can be so mindful, so embodied, that it's very readily trauma-informed. And I think having some awareness of trauma really supports us in cultivating our empathy, cultivating our restorative mindset. So I think that's a really important part of this work. And we all know how important it is to be trauma-informed now that we are learning more and more about just how we are all dealing with trauma, and some more than others. But it's something that is also universal and is another place we can meet. So take one question, then we'll move on. Rick.
Yes, bouncing off what you just said, here in the ASI, and also with what I do with my interview show, we're often approached by people who have been very traumatized by spiritual teachers and taken advantage of, again, sexually, financially, and in many other ways. And I certainly, and also even we as the ASI have been ill-equipped to really get into a mediating capacity between teachers and these aggrieved students. It's just a bit much, to tackle with everything else we've got going on. But, perhaps you could be some kind of adjunct resource that could get involved in some of these situations and help to resolve things.
Thank you, Rick. I think this work is incredibly robust. And that preparation phase, as I mentioned, it's all customized, right? Depending upon who's showing up and what the situation is. So we can build in as much preparation as we want. And we can appreciate that healing the harm may not be a quick fix either, which also brings us back to the indigenous roots of restorative justice, where they understood that healing can take generations if you're dealing with generational wounding. So there's a way that we could kind of bring an appreciation of that into this work. But I hope you're getting a sense of just how full it can be, which is a great segue into the next set of slides. These are the points that Cindy put in the chat from us, and I don't want to, not going to go over them here. I just wanted to have them as a part of the slideshow so you could see them again if you looked at the recording. I do say in the last one there that I believe this is a process that can hold power imbalances. And I think that has a lot of relevance for ASI. But I wanted to, just as we move towards our closing, talk a little bit about the requirements for this work. A restorative mindset, the time and energy, right? There's preparation meetings, plus the circle process may take more than one circle. There's willingness and capacity, right? This is voluntary, and it requires the capacity to be resourced. And the community people can support each other in that for something like this. And we're very likely going to want participants with the power to implement repair. If the harm has rippled out to impact the organization, impact the community, right? We're going to want people participating in the circle that really have power to implement change, implement transformation. And these requirements represent challenges, right? So let's be honest about that. Not everyone's going to be a candidate for this work. But those challenges also represent opportunities, great opportunities. I have referred to this work as the ultimate spiritual practice. You can think about that. Some of the additional resources that we're going to leave you with are these, and Cindy's going to post links in the chat. They're Google Docs and websites, and we encourage you to copy those links that are in the chat and tuck them away so that you can access these resources after the session is over. But we've got our active peace circle agreements. I have written a quick write-up on the distinction between active peace circles and restorative justice, and the basic stages of the active peace circle process. You've got the needs inventory link, my website, which includes a very full demo of an active peace circle process using volunteers, Cindy included, and a sexual harassment scenario. So there's hours worth of demo there, one process that you can access if you are so inclined to go deeper. The Zaire Institute is a great resource for kind of general cutting edge restorative justice information. And then we've got my email address there. And then possible next steps. There could be some kind of follow-up to this session, either another group like this or one-on-one. I'm happy to follow up with any or all of you one-on-one. This is what I do. This is what I love. I also offer training consultation, facilitation. I'm open to other suggestions for follow-up, other groups that might benefit from a presentation like this. And then I just thought I would just name that I'm listed as a mediator on the ASI website offering restorative mediation, which has a lot of these elements, but it's not the full enchilada, but also offering the active peace circle process for deeper levels of harm. Thank you for your kind attention. I would love to take the time for brief takeaways. Please post in the chat any closing comments, any takeaways that you'd like to share, challenges, opportunities that you see, appreciations, just anything. And just please know that you can get in touch with me if you have a question that didn't get answered, if there's anything you'd like to follow up on, don't hesitate to email. And before turning it back to Jack, I just want to say that in general, I believe that strengthening human interpersonal relationships is a linchpin in the evolutionary leap that we seem called to make in support of life on Earth and our grandchildren, you know. But I think the interpersonal relationship part, I don't think we can pay too much attention to that. I think it's deserving of a lot of care and feeding. And like I said early on, this has been my trajectory. I still have an awful lot of growth potential. So thank you. And I'll turn it over back to Jack to close it out.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Cindy, for your tech support. And thank you, Scott. Thank you for bringing the richness of your work, your experience, your insight, your training. It's been very, very rich. Where we would like to take it from here is up to the community. So folks, email if there's we need more of this. And we'll just see if we can run a webinar around it. I'm not sure, it's been so rich. We need to know what has significance and relevance and what resonates with you, the members. So feel free to email us and let that inform our way on. I'd encourage you to save the chat. The 3 dots at the very bottom of the meeting chat, if you click the 3 dots on the very bottom of the white piece on the side of your screen, you'll click it, you'll see an option to save chat and save it, because those links in there that Scott gave us are very rich indeed. There's a lot we can do with this. Our next webinar, save the date for June 3. It will be a community webinar. I don't know where we're going yet with it. Maybe you guys can let us know. But I'll see you all, hopefully, on June the 3rd. And thank you for giving your time and energy and focus. And may blessings be around all of us as we move our way forward in a more informed way. Thank you.
Thank you.